Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Florida International University Green Library and to the 14th Annual Eric Williams Memorial Lecture. As you open your program, you will see at the top in red in the center panel that your MC for the evening is supposed to be Nikki Mohan from WPLG TV Channel 10 ABC. I want the record to reflect that Nikki Mohan is a daughter of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So for all the Jamaican gentlemen that are here hoping to see Nikki Mohan, I hate to disappoint you that she will not be here this evening to MC the program and has asked myself, Mr. Marlon Hill, who's of Jamaican descent, let the record reflect, which means then all the ladies from Trinidad and Tobago can stay. But thank you for being here for the 14th Annual Eric Williams Memorial Lecture. Would like to welcome you again to the Florida International University campus and the home of the Golden Panthers. Any Panthers here? All the students who are here? Excellent, excellent. We're going to have some extra credit questions for you later on in the lecture that have nothing to do with what our distinguished speakers have to say today. But thank you for being here, and hopefully you're here on your own recognizance. I'd like to remind you, if you could, put all your smartphones and your iPads and your, if you still have a beeper, Dr. Lashley, you can please put your beeper on vibrate or turn off your beeper, please. We don't want to be interrupted by any selections of steel band music or any of your favorite instrumentals. Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to invite up our Executive Director of the School of International and Public Affairs, Dr. John Stack, to welcome you to the university.
Welcome, everybody. It's an honor for me again to be at the Eric Williams Memorial Lecture. This is an extraordinarily distinguished group of scholars, thinkers, practitioners for tonight's lecture, and I look forward to hearing it very, very much. I've told my dear friend Jean-Ray here this, and I mean it. I think the Caribbean is our future, as it has been our past. And to have the panel we have tonight suggests the linkages between the past, the distant, and the future in a way that I think suggests both positive cooperation and understanding. So, on behalf of Florida International University, I want to welcome you here tonight. The African and Africa Diaspora Program is a stellar example of what we do at the university in terms of creating an intellectual climate, a dialogue, and debate. So on behalf of FIU and the School of International and Public Affairs, I'm really thrilled to welcome all of you here tonight. Thank you. Dr. Jean right here.
Thank you very much, John, and I will join my voice in welcoming everyone to this 14th edition of the Eric Williams Memorial Lecture. I joined FIU in 1998, as I was saying last night, and I, as a result, was able to be present since the holding of the very first Eric Williams Memorial Lecture in 1999 with John Hope Franklin. And since then, I've been at FIU. I became director in 2008, and it's my pleasure to continue the tradition organizing this lecture in close collaboration with the Eric Williams Memorial Collection, and particularly with Miss Erica Connell Williams, without whom without the strength of whom this lecture most certainly will not take place. I mean, this is the result of our collaboration. So let's just give a round of applause to Erica. I don't know where she is. But so before I go down on my list of items I must talk about, I would like to invite everyone to check us out, the African and African Diaspora Studies program. We have a very rich and up-to-date website at africana.fiu.edu. We offer undergraduate certificates, one graduate certificate, an MA degree in AADS, in African and African Diaspora Studies, as well as 3 combined MA PhD programs. We offer a study abroad program that brings students to Senegal and the Gambia in West Africa, Summer C this year, Summer C 2013. So all of the information, you can find it on the website as well as on the table when you walk out. And we have a vibrant, you should pay attention to what we're doing. We have a vibrant group of faculty who are covering and teaching and conducting research about the Caribbean, obviously, in various disciplines, but also about the African diaspora in Latin America, in Europe, and of course, as well, on the continental African realities. And so we are a rich group of folks, and rich in what we do, and so we could help, with some donations if you guys wanted to support what we want to do. All of the information is on our website, as well as I'm sure you'll be told what you could do today, eventually, at the end of the lecture. So at this point, I'd like to recognize the presence of Miss Cheryl Gale Thompson, who is the Deputy Consul General from Barbados. She's over there, so thank you very much for your presence. I should also recognize a number of proclamations and greetings that we've received in support of this lecture, for the 14th edition, from the Governor Rick Scott, the US Senator Bill Nelson, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, and mayors and commissioners of Broward County, Miami-Dade County, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, North Miami Beach, and South Miami, Lauderhill, Coral Spring, Pembroke Pines, and the village of El Portal. We also have received support from the Haitian organization Saint-La Haitian Neighborhood Center, as well as the Haitian American Historical Society. So, as always, some of my colleagues in ADS and GSS and other departments are giving special credits to students to attend this lecture. So you should know that the media broadcasting of the lecture is made through the Heritage Radio in Trinidad and Tobago and WBAI Radio in New York. So the lecture is also being made available to the University of the West Indies on demand. And you should know that as we have done with all of the lectures in the past, almost all, they've been videotaped and they are available on our website at africana.fiu.edu. If you go to lecture series, and they're all there on video. So at this point, I will introduce Miss Sandra Grant Griffith, who is the Consul General of Jamaica. So, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rahir. Dr. Stark, my colleague Marlon Hill, distinguished presenters Ambassador Dumas and Miss Rachel Manley, Dr. Russell, faculty and staff of the FIU and students, Miss Erica Cornell, colleague members of the Consular Corps, and ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, I must, like Marlon, point out that I am not Dr. Kent Hippolyte of the Dean of the Consular Corps. I am standing in for him this evening because he could not be here and sends his apologies. But it is my absolute pleasure to greet you on behalf of the Consular Corps and the Dean, and to say that it is good to be here, to be part of this annual lecture being convened in the FIU's very special Green Library. The Caribbean Consular Corps of Miami is proud to be linked to this 2012 FIU Eric Williams Memorial Lecture, and to continue a tradition that began some 13 years ago. We congratulate especially Erica Connell, who is the keeper of the flame for this particular project. And we, of course, recognize the commitment and the constancy of the FIU's Africa and Diaspora Studies Department for the value they place on this particular lecture. And of course, Dr. Jean Rahir, the director, has been most specially committed, and we thank him for his efforts on behalf of the Caribbean people. The forum continues to provide context for examining the aspirations of our Caribbean forefathers, and this year especially audits the progress along the course we began as independent nations of Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago in particular some 50 years ago. We do so interestingly in the key Northern Hemisphere Metropolitan Center of Miami, which is a global marketplace, where among other things, and here I speak for my consular colleagues, we seek to highlight the opportunities working with our bilateral partners, academic institutions, international organizations to strengthen the region's global image and competitiveness. In so doing, we propose and receive, of course, insights into how states, civil society leadership, international partners, and diaspora have and can work together to expand not only our economies and our traditions, democratic and social traditions, but we also look at social sustainability and how we can enhance prosperity for our region. But to do so, we must examine leadership in the region, past and present, and dissect politics and programs, and identify key tipping points that have shaped our Caribbean DNA for better or for worse throughout the years. We therefore, within that framework, consider it extremely vital that this kind of dialogue continues to be presented as a counterpoint to the cultural entertainment, quote unquote, value in which we sometimes are prone to be typified, and how our space and our lives and our roles are in fact examined. So the Caribbean Consular Corps does not take for granted your presence here this evening. We thank you for being here, for continuing the dialogue with us, and for helping us to look back and look forward. And of course, we thank the FIU and Erica Williams Connell for the efforts that have brought us to this place annually. And we trust that with your support, we can continue to do this every year. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General. We'll make sure that Mr. Hippolyte recognizes that there are a couple of demerits for not showing up on the 50th anniversary of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. There's a price to pay, but we'll send his regards. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the African Diaspora Studies program, must remind you, after 14 years, the street of being here at this university. If you'd like to see some of the records of some of the speeches and some of the other special archives that we have here, right across the hallway, we have the Digital Library of the Caribbean. I don't know if you know this, that has over 2 million pages of content of the history of the Caribbean right across from here it's being housed, but it's available online. 2 million pages of content, including some of Eric Williams, Prime Minister Eric Williams' writings are also at this digital library. You can see it at Dialoc, DILOC.com, if you haven't visited it right now. And the digital library is right now in the process of trying to locate more content having to do with the building of the canal in Panama, the Panama Canal, and the West Indian migrants' impact on the building of the canal. So please check it out, DILOC.com, if you haven't as yet visited it. It has well over hundreds of thousands of hits on the website, and hopefully they will have some more after the weekend. And we just want to thank the collaboration between FIU and the University of Florida for that. So please check that out. 50 years of independence, and we're now going to have a conversation about that August 6th and August 31st. And to get us going in that conversation this evening right here, I would like to now invite up Dr. Heather Russell. She's the graduate director of the African Diaspora Studies program here at FIU, to introduce our speakers. Please, you can applause for her, please.
Good evening, everyone. Distinguished members of the Consular Corps, corporate sponsors, elected officials, members of the FIU community, friends of African and African Diaspora Studies, distinguished guests all. It is indeed my privilege to have been asked to introduce our guest speakers this evening, Rachel Manley and former Ambassador Reginald Dumas, two persons whose lives and contributions to Caribbean thought, albeit via different yet intricately related paths, invoke our best imaginings of not only what the Caribbean has been, but most importantly, what it could be. I would be remiss, however, if I did not thank again here publicly Erica Williams Connell for her tireless stewardship of the Eric Williams Memorial Collection and her continued commitment to ensuring the legacy of that the legacy of Eric Eustace Williams continues to thrive. Not her commitment is important, and here she is. So now we can clap her. We're thanking you for your stewardship. Erica Williams Connell's commitment continues to be important, not just because of Eric Williams' status as one of the most important world figures of the 20th century, but because when we measure ourselves against his values, ideals, and achievements, we are reminded every day that the work of achieving Caribbean sovereignty, dignity, and decency for all Caribbean citizens is unfinished work. Today's lecture is such a timely reminder. I'm sure that everyone here would much rather be listening to Professor Brian Meeks introducing our speakers, doing, as they say, waxing profound and prophetic. So would I, but the task has fallen to me this evening, and I accept it with humility. Unfortunately, Professor Meeks, as we know, is in Jamaica, continuing to weather the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. And of course, we send our thoughts and our prayers to all those who have been affected by Hurricane Sandy, especially those that have lost loved ones. And of course, we pray for the safety and security of those who now stand in Sandy's path. So it's not lost on me when we were told the good news that Rachel Manley had accepted Erica's invitation, that tonight would in fact be historic. The daughter of Eric Williams, the founder of the People's National Movement, and the granddaughter of Norman Washington Manley, the founder of the People's National Party, key conceptualizers of the West Indian Federation, that they would be in the same room with us. Surely, Prime Ministers Eric, Norman, and Michael are smiling down on us tonight and giving us their blessings. The daughter and granddaughter of two former Jamaican heads of government, Michael and Norman, Rachel Manley grew up in Jamaica and migrated to Canada in 1986. As a Caribbean literary personality and winner of Jamaica's Centennial Medal for Poetry, Miss Manley has authored 3 books of poetry: Prisms, Poetry 2, and A Light Left On. She's the editor of her late grandmother's diaries, Edna Manley, The Diaries, and has also written a trilogy of memoirs about her famous family: Drumblair, Memories of Jamaican Childhood, which received the Governor General's Award for Literature in Canada. The second, Slipstream, A Daughter Remembers, and the last in the collection, Horses in Her Hair, A Granddaughter's Story. Rachel now teaches literary nonfiction and memoir in the MFA program at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is a frequent contributor to literary anthologies and writes book reviews for leading newspapers in North America and Britain. She's a Mary Ingram Bunting Fellow of Radcliffe University, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a Rockefeller Bellagio Fellow. In an interview with the Jamaica Gleaner about her second book of the trilogy, Slipstream, A Daughter Remembers, in response to a question about why she chose that title for the book about her father, she said, "A slipstream is a strong current left in the wake of 2 giant propellers. My father's parents were the propellers, and he came in their wake. By extension, we, his children, are caught in his wake." The title of her lecture tonight is 50 Years of Jamaican Independence, A Manly Perspective. Join me in thanking Rachel. Our second speaker, Reginald Dumas, has lived and led a dedicated, active, consistent global political life of service. A veteran diplomat, Mr. Dumas was one of the first in newly independent Trinidad and Tobago's Foreign Service in 1962. Who better placed to speak tonight on the relevance of Eric Williams 50 years after Trinidad and Tobago's independence? He was appointed ambassador at the age of 38 and has served in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean and North America. In 1988, he retired from the Foreign Service as Trinidad and Tobago's ambassador to Washington and permanent representative to the Organization of American States, the OAS. He was at that time appointed permanent secretary to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and head of the country's public service. He has also represented the Caribbean community via CARICOM in several capacities. A member of several private sector boards and commissions of inquiry in his native land. In 2004, the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, appointed him as his special advisor on Haiti. Mr. Dumas's Haiti experience led him to establish the MediaNet Haiti Relief Fund, for which he serves as chairman. Former Ambassador Dumas was educated at Queen's Royal College in Trinidad and Tobago, Cambridge University, and the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. He's also been a visiting fellow at Oxford University. He's the author of 2 books, In the Service of the Public and An Encounter with Haiti. He is a frequent and much sought-after commentator on Trinidad and Tobago's current affairs. He continues to serve, as he has always done, in the vein of his co-sharer in the Independence Project, for whom this lecture is named, with integrity and courage, and in the tradition of global public intellectualism. I look forward to learning from you both, and I now ask the audience to join me in welcoming Ms. Rachel Manley to the podium. Thank you.
Members of the Diplomatic Corps, officials of the City of Miami, my host from FIU, my co-star and mentor and Land of the Caribbean, Reggie Dumas, my sister of circumstance, Erica Cornell Williams, brothers and sisters of the Caribbean. It is a great honor, but also a moment of huge personal sentimental pleasure for me to be invited here this evening for the annual Eric Williams Memorial Lecture and to share a stage with Reginald Dumas in the glow of our celebrations for Trinidad and Jamaica's 50th anniversary of our island's independence. I cannot begin without saying a few words about the remarkable job Erica has done to preserve her father's legacy. Over the years, it has served as both an inspiration and a call to conscience when it comes to my own grandfather's legacy. In our case, after independence, when he was forced to sell our home, Norman Manley, who I knew as Paddy, burnt most of his private papers. That, I suspect, symbolized a far more profound heartbreak of personal disappointment than either the loss of our home or elections or his papers might convey. Many of the public documents that illustrate Norman Manley's most important years and achievements were shared both intellectually and politically in a common vision with your extraordinary father, Erica, and I don't know where you are. In fact, my grandfather and both our fathers, Eric and Michael, shared a regional vision tailored by the measurements of possibility. I shall leave here again with renewed determination to get the Manley Memorial Center, which has been in planning for decades, to finally get underway. I was only 15 when the Union Jack came down at midnight on August the 2nd, 1962, and the Jamaican flag went up. It was 50 years ago, and the ceremony took place at our new National Stadium in Kingston amidst the wildest joy. The Jamaican flag, black, green, and gold, the flag that has become so famous this year through Jamaica's track and field at the London Olympics, rose up the flagpole and unfurled in our island's typically turbulent sky. It was just cause for jubilation. I am of that transitional generation, the last to experience colonialism and the first to come of age in an independent Jamaica. In many ways, my generation has the sense we were reborn with our country, sharing its initial 50 years, which in human years is much more than half a lifetime, but in the long sweep of history is but the blink of an eye. I lived at the heart of the struggle, but as a young, bemused witness, never part of it, and yet it all felt like a huge part of me. Please bear in mind that though I have lived close to history, I am not a historian, and though I lived embroiled in my family's politics, I am not a politician. I am here speaking to a group of academics, but I am not an academic. I am a writer. So all I can offer as Jamaica turns 50 are the musings of an artist, a granddaughter's and daughter's biased view of the years. I can't tell this story without speaking of the generations of my family who came before. What Jamaican story can be told without grandmothers and grandfathers? And in my case, they seem to have been so near the heart of our country's growth, both politically and culturally. And to gauge our progress, we must consider where we are coming from. In the 1920s, long before I was born, when my grandparents, Norman and Edna, disembarked from a banana boat in Jamaica, he a Jamaican returning from Oxford University and years as a soldier in the Great War, she, a half Jamaican, his cousin, born in Cornwall, who studied art in London. There was nothing complex about Jamaica. It was a country that had been established in the most radical, artificial, and ruthless manner. History is well known. The 95% black population had been sold into slavery by rival tribes in Africa and brought through arguably the most brutal journey of history to provide the plantations in the Caribbean with a free workforce. The history of Jamaica, the history of the other islands in the Caribbean, and indeed the history of this country where we are right now, will be forever characterized by the barbaric evil of slavery, the Middle Passage symbolizing a nightmare crossing whose waters, like Leith, would wipe away all memory, family, country, history, language, religion, and tradition. In our case, Britain ruled through the small minority of colonial whites. The brown middle class, which emerged over time from the planters' rapes or indiscretions, were a product of these transplants. Most of these crossbred brownings spent their lives imitating and ingratiating themselves to their white rulers and distancing themselves from the reality of their black roots. There was little artistic or intellectual life in Jamaica at that time. In school, children learned Scottish songs about Scottish lakes and English nursery rhymes. They sang European Protestant hymns. They were taught the king's English, the colonizers' religion, the colonizers' manners and rituals and habits. Paintings featured snow. Local writers used foreign themes and imagery, daffodils and lions, in their prose and poetry. "Where are the artists?" asked my astounded grandmother, herself a sculptor. She searched for signs of an original voice from the Jamaican people who lived in this richly verdant and stunningly beautiful land, with its majestic mountains, self-willed rivers and waterfalls, its endless embrace of an energetic Caribbean sea. Any original voice was only there marginally, almost like a refugee, in small rituals like Pocomania or Obia, in mento music or Kumina and Jonkano. But it wasn't considered authentic, just patronized as something either distasteful or charming, a curiosity, but in the end inconsequential. Art is inspired by a search for answers. It interprets, it commemorates, it reflects, it proposes, it defines, it protects, it protests. It searches for insight, it looks in and behind the mirror. It begins with the curious to investigate and experiment like a child who touches all it sees, putting everything in its mouth. Curiosity brings insight. It isn't as though we have been there as a Jamaican or a Trinidadian people from the beginning of time. Ours was either an opportunist or forced migration. We were stranded societies, all unhappy on unfamiliar shores, both the planters and the slaves, and the indentured laborers, all longing for a motherland. And in 1922, Jamaica was indeed an unhappy home. Its society was stagnant, its people frozen in assumed roles, an atmosphere only good for festering the sores of history. New generations remain stranded with no language or means or map of indigenous memory with which to go back to what became an eviscerated concept of home. This was the denuded landscape that confronted my grandparents when they arrived in 1922. And then came 1938. And the Jamaica sugar workers' strike in Frome, which spread nationwide and became for many a flashpoint for nationalism. My grandparents were deeply embroiled in that struggle, one that would inspire the birth of a great democratic party in Jamaica, the People's National Party. Something had stirred in the hearts of Jamaicans. Some quickening flame had spontaneously emerged. I would arrive in their lives 10 years later, in 1950. By then, the quest for national and cultural independence was well underway in my new home. This was all part of a search for our own voice. What is Jamaica? Who are Jamaicans? Who am I? It is hard to believe this now with Jamaicans so self-assured and distinct, but these were the questions being posed. Art classes had begun at the Institute. Edna had already edited 2 volumes of Jamaica's Writing in Focus, our version of Trinidad's Beacon, Barbados' BIM, and British Guiana's Kick Overall. The quest was on for a nascent voice. A whole new world was emerging around me. My home Drumblare became a microcosm of my country's early development. On the front veranda, my grandmother presided over the painters and sculptors. The living room she kept for the writers, near to the liquor cabinet. They were always drinking and falling in love. On the back veranda, Paddy presided over the political nationalist. It seemed logical to me that politics and culture were evolving side by side. A whole new world was emerging around me. I remember in 1952, when Hurricane Charlie hit, Edna made her studio available to the homeless. Among them were the Rastafarians. They liked her studio in the long grass. They started to grow their ganja there. All the neighbors were complaining about this new cult that they feared, for their hair was long and unbrushed, and they smoked the holy weed which made their eyes red. My grandmother explained to me that they had found a religion that was their own and which was a comfort for them. She said they needed to feel nurtured from the now silent roots of the past in Africa. We could hear them beating their drums some evenings, and they would bring vegetables they had grown and carved walking sticks they had whittled for my grandparents. My grandmother's explanation seemed perfectly plausible to me as a young child. These were good neighbors. I wondered why all the other neighbors and my friends at school were so scared of them. I liked the fact my grandparents were inclusive rather than exclusive. In fact, Jamaica now is known for its music and its culture, even for its no-problem, laid-back ganja-smoking cool, which evolved from the very band of dreads that so scared people all those 50-odd years ago. So these were my earliest memories in their home Drumblare. That was life as I knew it. As a young child, I was always told when my grandparents disappeared for days campaigning for various elections that they were building a nation. I imagined them like carpenters on a roof banging nails into shingles. Since then, in 50 years, short for the long march of history, we have come into our own in so many ways. Where many countries have failed in their goal of democracy, ours has thrived. In fact, in Jamaica's case, sometimes the national argument becomes so virulent we need to tone it down. Enough cannot be said for the pioneer courage, sensitivity, and imagination it took to fight for the touchstone of our own culture, to reflect our landscape, our values, and realities separate from that of England. We had to work in their language, but the language of Shakespeare is a language of Dylan Thomas in Wales and James Joyce in Ireland. It is suited to protest and self-definition. And you really have to stop to think and wonder about our history to understand how we went from such an artistic emptiness in 1922 to such a fullness today, 90 years later, 50 years after our independence. The work of the 40s and 50s was critical to this. Our writing and fine arts, our music and theatre exploded onto the scene, not just at home, but around the world. It's a wonderful feeling to see that light of recognition in a stranger's eyes when I say, I am a Jamaican. Now they know who we are. Trinidad and Tobago are very fortunate to have had the Doc to lead them into independence. He understood as no other his island's unique culture. In Jamaica, I believe it was our great misfortune not to have Norman Manley at the helm as the shackles of colonialism were loosed and we threw open the doors to independence. In those first years, we seemed to be more interested in the trappings of the venture than in visionary institute building required for this transition. That's my opinion anyway. So by the 70s, we seemed independent only by name. Socially, little had changed since 1962. Although the 1970s government of my late father Michael has been harshly criticized for economic failures, I think relevant strides were made in that decade in an effort to define beyond the cultural and political who we are socially. Certainly the 1970s saw us as a third world leader calling for a new economic world order to level the terms of trade between the first and third world nations. We helped to fight apartheid politically, while Bob Marley's music spread the message of protest through Africa on the Afrocentric soul of Rastafari. At home, the government began to make real strides towards a socially just society. We passed laws for free education all the way to university level to reduce illiteracy, opening doors of opportunity wide for a whole new generation of Jamaicans, many of whom are highly successful now, and a lot of whom, unfortunately, are not in Jamaica. There were laws for equal pay for women and paid maternity leave, the abolition of the Bastard Act, a national minimum wage law with an 8-hour day, and workers' rights for domestic staff. Do you have all that in America? Even the language of labor changed to reflect a new respect for all workers. Until that time, we still aped a society invented by the British. A genuine effort was made to bridge the economic gap between the rich and the poor. These things changed the face of Jamaica forever. It was a decade that also saw the CARICOM agreement signed in '73 by Barrow, Burnham, my father, and Eric Williams on July 4th, my grandfather's birthday, and I was deeply moved to hear from Reggie yesterday that was the doc's insistence, that it be on my grandfather's birthday in memory of him, in an intensified effort to connect the islands again in an economic relationship of free trade. But of all the legacies of our colonial past, the economic one has been the hardest to break. Our economy was invented to supply England with our natural resources for their enormous enrichment. In return, we took our slim earnings and imported their goods instead of investing in our agricultural and industrial possibilities at home. A win-win situation for England, designed by England. One of the central tenets of that 70s government was self-sufficiency. And who knows how different history might look today if our economy hadn't been struck by the effects of the OPEC rise by 400% of fuel costs in 1973. Programs like Operation Land Lease made land available for small farmers, rural electrification, the National Housing Trust, the Electoral Commission of Jamaica that registers voters and vouchsafes the integrity of our electoral system, and the list goes on. We have slowly shed a lot of the bigotry and prejudice and bias, not all, inherited from colonialism. Sports analysts endlessly discuss the question of Jamaican speed, our ability to move explosively. Is it in our genes or our disposition? Is it in our yams? Some have even suggested it is our reaction to the starter's gun. So we are halfway there. We know who we are, and we are fast. But insight and speed are not enough. There is one important aspect of nationhood, the cornerstone of independence, that so far has eluded us, and that is the question of economic independence. Economically, we have not been successful. That's just the truth. It's the things that I see when I go back to my country. Schoolhouses debilitated, education money lost, people still carrying water in buckets. I read that we have accumulated over $1.5 trillion Jamaican dollars in debt. A small band of millionaires account for a large portion of our wealth. Like the rest of the Western world, our middle class is struggling, and the poor characterize our landscape in humiliating urban ghettos, hillside barrios, and rural backwaters that tourists may find quaint, but which scream of frustrations of poverty and lack of opportunity. And so on that count, let us not pretend hard issues need to be faced and solutions found. May I just have a sip? But 50 years later, I applaud the wonder of the moment in 1962 when we broke free from hundreds of years of colonial rule. And yet, as I watched the ceremony with my grandparents all those years ago, I simply remember my heavy heart. The years leading up to independence were, for me anyway, characterized by the excitement of the federal dream. Almost from the start, the idea of national sovereignty for the English-speaking Caribbean had been set in the context of regionalism and federation. Eric Williams had seen to that. My grandfather's trips to England were now interspersed with trips up and down the Caribbean as he shared his quest with his like-minded counterpart in Trinidad. Both men had risen to prominence not on money, but on education, graduating from Oxford. Manley, with the older, studied law and Williams history, and as such both brought valuable gifts as they shared their ideals and ideas and attempted to cobble out solutions. Looking back to the Drumblere years, I don't know what they discussed in the dining room around the large mahogany table that Paddy had appropriated for his federal meetings with the visiting leaders like Eric Williams, Grantley Adams, Vere Bird, Marichaud. The first time I met the great Uncle Eric, he was seated at our table beside Grantley Adams. I don't know how well they got on. I was a mischievous child, and as I crawled under the table, I tied the shoelaces of these two great leaders together. And I was quite unaware of either its symbolism or what in fact was taking place at the table above me. I do remember my grandfather was very amused I had done it, I think because of the two characters involved. We live in a world of celebrity now, where personal fame is a goal and public service too often a means to a personal end. Perhaps for all our modern griping, life has become easier for us. And those things past heroes like Williams and Manley fought for are now taken for granted. But in those days, fighting for independence, for our right to our island, our right to our own traditions and religion and cultures, our right to an educational system that reflected our values and goals, our right to something as natural to us now as a vote. These things were hard-won freedoms that wise and selfless men who could have amassed vast personal fortunes with their brains and aptitude, made huge personal sacrifice to secure for us. I remember Paddy explaining federation to me, as though he was introducing me to a family. I was an only child in Drumblere, so the thought of all these brother and sister islands was indeed a romantic notion. When he showed me this necklace of islands on the hurricane map, I was fascinated by their names, the Saints Vincent and Lucia and Kitts. My grandmother loved to say Kittitians, but always got stumped by what to call those from Tobago, Tobagons or Tobagonians. Tobagonians. Montserrat, Trinidad, Antigua, Grenada, Dominica, Barbuda, where she swore they had more donkeys than people. And then the larger cousins with their French names, their Spanish and Dutch names, Cuba, Haiti, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Aruba. They all sounded like music to me, exotic and glamorous. He made this map a magical kingdom. But for Jamaica, this feeling of family didn't exist. We are too far away and separate geographically. Divide and rule, the English had kept us mostly ignorant of each other. Although history had made us natural siblings with bonds of common experience, it was easy to stir suspicion and negativity in the national psyche. I have often wondered whether being introduced to an idea through simple family affection and loyalty, as I was, is not an easier road to a sense of regional belonging than all the arguments about politics and economics. So, I watched those celebrations with very mixed feelings, for the flag that I had hoped to see inching its arduous way up that flagpole was lying in a cupboard at my home Drumblare. It was a blue flag with white stripes of undulating water and an orange-yellow sun at its center. It was a flag of the West Indies Federation. But the West Indies Federation, only 2 years old, had just been dismantled, and with it my grandfather's dream. Independence felt to me like a consolation prize. My grandfather had lost 2 national elections, and it seemed to me so wrong that the man who was my hero, yes, but who had also written our country's new constitution would not be leading the nation into its independence. To me, it was personal. Today, few young people realize that for 2 years before independence, the islands of the English-speaking Caribbean were in fact federated and in a full political union, with the federal headquarters in Port of Spain and Grantley Adams from Barbados as its first prime minister. We had a federal flag that flew over the government buildings. We were at the point of becoming an entity in the United Nations. May 31st, 1962 was the scheduled date of our federation's independence. The story of Jamaica's referendum is history. Eric Williams' famous arithmetic was painfully wise and true. March 31st, 1962 would become, instead, the dark day of Federation's formal demise. The Federation had not had time to establish a track record. It hadn't had time to succeed or fail. In Jamaica, the opposition had been able to play on the fears of people of a larger, at the time resource-richer island who believed they would be subsidizing the smaller islands of the region. Our 2 great joint ventures, the university and the cricket team, remain our flagships and remind us what we can achieve together. Just last August, look at the array of islanders on that field at the London Olympics. The whole Caribbean was there. Can you imagine if we were all wearing Caribbean colors? The Caribbean would have been awash with gold and silver, just like Columbus and the conquistadors had hoped. But perhaps an even stronger argument for a federation lies in the example of 1982, when, as separate entities, we were faced with a conundrum in Grenada that led to the US invasion. No matter what side of the ideological dispute you come down on, I believe Grenada happened because it was a tiny island in trouble and alone. Had Grenada been part of a federation, maybe a solution could have been found to the political crisis, and the bloody events and subsequent US invasion could have been avoided. If you blame Cuba's influence, you have to consider Cuba wouldn't have had that influence if Grenada had its place in a federated family of our islands. If you blamed America for arriving, opportunistically or not, I believe the United States would not have arrived if we had been a federated region. But there is reason more compelling than economics or trade, foreign policy, and regional defense, the centralizing and economizing of governments. That subterranean urge that invisibly links the archipelago, it is simply that instinct of family. Last night we sat together around a huge round table. Trinidad, Tobago, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana. We discovered who had a parent from this island or that. It took less than a minute for strangers to chat like family. Soon Trinidad and Tobago were lovingly ribbing each other. Cricket's fast bowlers were being discussed and compared. Federation was being analyzed. My point is, we are family. We really are. History made siblings of us. Why would we resist a union so compelling? A union in which the laws of loyalty and common cause, of giving and taking, of guarding each other's backs, of being not as weak as our weakest link, but as strong and as wise and as successful as the best of our tribe. We would face the world strengthened by our various contributions, regardless of size, knowing that together as family, the glory as well as the failures and sorrows are shared. CARICOM has survived for over 30 years, making it one of the longest integration movements among developing countries, an achievement indeed. It has not necessarily met with the expectation of the founding fathers, but it survives despite limited resources while grappling with a wide range of social and economic issues which bedevil so many countries today. Although we are sailing through frustratingly choppy waters at the moment with CARICOM, governments preoccupied with critical problems arising out of the global economic crisis, there is so much at stake to compel us to build on what we have. Beyond a global economy, there are modern concerns of climate change, international crime, food security, health and global security that make our unity imperative to our survival. Big as the biggest of us thinks we are, we can no longer go it alone. I believe a generation of men and women will emerge again who will set aside island machismo or personal ambition, putting our region's fate ahead of our soul selves. Over the years, I have held on to this dream, and I believe we will return to federation one day. And maybe at last we are seeing a first move towards integration again. In a recent email exchange with Brian Meeks, he wrote about the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, all members of CARICOM, deciding to move towards deeper integration. He tells me they are in the process of putting in place a new treaty. They are moving rapidly towards a new federal arrangement. Interestingly, although a part of France, Martinique and Guadeloupe want to develop closer relations given geographical proximity and the close interaction with the OECS countries. And I quote Brian here, "The irony is that the little eight who suffered the most from the breakup of federation may, if their new efforts are successful, set the example and lead the rest of us back into a new era of integration beyond the limitations of CARICOM." I know in this Brian, like me, may be reading too much into it. But I am reminded of Martin Carter, that great Guyanese poet, when he wrote, "My course is set. I give my sail the wind to navigate the islands of the stars till I collect my scattered skeleton, till I collect." Maybe one day we will, and in so doing, retrieve the dreams of Eric Williams and Norman Manley. I would like to end with a short memory from my book Drumlair about the night my grandfather lost the referendum. I can still see Paddy at the head of the table in front of the Drumlair clock, his being supported by one elbow where it rested in the cup of a hand whose index finger formed a thoughtful axis along his cheek. Only his eyes stirred, their grey rings somehow indifferent, as they followed the small scorchings of sound that outlasted the announcements from the old radio. The large federal flag was neatly folded like an ended life on the table in front of him. The blue had been burnt by the sunlight, and only the white seemed intact where the foam of the waves had no paint. The strings from the edges were frayed and filthy. I was 14, old enough to recognize a watershed in our lives, if not in history. I hugged him. He stroked my long hair firmly as if it belonged to a horse he was settling. "So we lost," he said matter-of-factly, and released me. He picked up the flag with concern, as though he had somehow failed the spirit of it, and unfolded it so we both saw the cracked sun. He wrapped it around me like a sarong and smiled, and then arranged it like a shawl over my shoulders and pulled me to him. "Was it weakness of intellect, Birdie?" he muttered, rather than sang in amused self-deprecation. "Or an extra tough worm?" I improvised the words as, leaning back, I tried to read him. "Never forget this flag," his eyes implored. And although he said it incidentally, as if it were an appointment I must keep, he watched me, like a man who throws a stone into the river and waits to see how wide the circle of the ripple will extend. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Manley. Thank you very much. Hopefully you tell us what's in that secret juice that you're drinking there. Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Reginald Dumas from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. I am not going to be as poetic as Rachel. I am not capable of that. I want to start by repeating some of the tributes that have been paid already to Erica for the dedication that she has shown over the years in keeping this flame alive and having this annual lecture. Strikes me that she is in fact a Williams. If anyone knew her father, which perhaps most of you didn't, I did, that stick-to-itiveness was one of his major characteristics. And I'd like to thank the African and African Diaspora Studies program also for the assistance it has given, the Caribbean Consular Corps, the City of Miami, I see the commissioner there, and my friend from, I was going to say compatriot, but then that word compatriot might suggest independence, and one isn't independent yet. My friend from Tobago, Mr. Colin Edwards. And don't talk about secession, because I'm not with you on that. In my reading for what I'm about to say, I tried to discern the threads, the patterns in Williams's thought, especially in the more than 20 years between 1960 and his death in 1981. I therefore looked not only at his better-known contributions, which a lot of you may know, but also at his less familiar offerings, such as his address to the University of the West Indies Economic Society in Jamaica in February 1963, his lecture at Queen's College in then British Guyana the following month, and his Noel Buxton lecture at Essex University in 1969. Two principal themes emerge clearly, consistent as the night follows the day. The first is independence. The mantra of his old acquaintance Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana was, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else shall be added unto you." Williams certainly wanted that political kingdom, and he brooked no compromise on it. But in 1960, he was thinking not of an independent Trinidad and Tobago, but of an independent West Indies Federation. And he also had in mind the American base in Chaguaramas, the northwest peninsula of Trinidad, whose return to the people of Trinidad and Tobago was the centerpiece of his nationalist struggle. However, where in Nkrumah and Sukarno from Indonesia and others in Africa and Asia, and indeed in the Caribbean, focused too long and intensely on the political, Williams understood at the outset that independence was infinitely more than a national flag and an anthem and a motto. These were important symbols, but they were by no means enough. Political independence had to be accompanied by economic independence. In his 1969 autobiography, Inward Hunger, he spoke of the challenges of independence and singled out foreign control of the economy as, quote, the most important issue, unquote. He carried that theme forward the following year in the Chaguaramas Declaration. But independence for Williams went even beyond the political and the economic into what has been called the psychological, that is, the ability and above all the willingness to think for oneself and to the extent possible to seek and achieve self-reliance, as Julius Nyerere attempted in Tanzania with indifferent success. It strikes me, ladies and gentlemen, that Williams's greatest disappointment lay in what I think he saw as his failure to have Trinidad and Tobago and the region attain or even come close to either economic or psychological independence. Well before political independence, he had perceived the dangers and pitfalls, and in his History of the People of Trinidad and Tobago, which was published on Independence Day, August 31st, 1962, he wrote scathingly about the individualism around him. If independence is one of the two principal themes that emerge from Williams's writings and speeches, the second, intimately linked to the first, is his dedication to the Caribbean region. And Caribbean for him meant not only the English-speaking Caribbean, but also the region as a whole. This emphasis on the region, as distinct from the various colonial and cultural segments thereof, continued as a core element of his worldview after the collapse of the West Indies Federation in 1962 and the separate independence of Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. Some see a contradiction between his declared commitment to regionalism and his refusal to continue with a truncated federation after the withdrawal of Jamaica, the one from 10 Leagues North that Rachel spoke about. But I do not. I myself was secretary to a delegation he led to Suriname the same month of our independence, that is August 1962. And after independence, he was in touch with, among others, the Netherlands Antilles and France with respect to Martinique and Guadeloupe. Unfortunately, his proposal in 1965 for a major conference of Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and extra-regional states with strong Caribbean interests, such as Canada, the Netherlands, and the USA, fell by the wayside. And it was only in 1972 that, together with Errol Barrow of Barbados, Forbes Burner of Guyana, and Michael Manley, Rachel's father of Jamaica, he was able to secure the formal recognition of Cuba. I was involved in that too, if only marginally, but I shan't go into that now. 3 years later, in 1975, his persistence and initiative resulted in the creation of the Caribbean Development and Cooperation Committee, or the CDCC, within the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America, or ECLA, now ECLAC. He had in fact proposed a body such as the CDCC in his 1963 Georgetown address. The organization is one of the very few bodies in which US entities like Puerto Rico sit, however uneasily, with Cuba. In speech after speech, lecture after lecture, Williams hammered away at the twin themes of independence and regional action, repeatedly merging the two in his insistence on the need for what, in his Essex remarks, he called a more autonomous Caribbean economy, and placing the merged two within the framework of hemispheric and international developments. It was vital to work together, to collaborate, to find a common voice, to stand on our own 2 feet. In his very last speech to a convention of his political party, the People's National Movement, delivered on January 25, 1981, 2 months before his death, he reminded everyone that, quote, Trinidad and Tobago silently adheres to its policy of Caribbean integration and non-interference in the affairs of other countries, unquote. Besides the 2 major themes of Williams's thought, there are a number of lesser but connected themes, not all of which I can examine this evening. One is democracy, the protection and promotion of which he told his fellow citizens on Independence Day in 1962 was their first responsibility. Williams has often been accused of turning his back on those words and of being the anti-democrat extraordinaire. I accept that his methods were not always tender, but that is hardly a characteristic of leadership peculiar to him. My assessment, ladies and gentlemen, is that Williams, the historian and intellectual, was in a constant tussle with Williams, the politician. Interestingly, he hinted at the same duality in Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, whom he much admired. The politician not infrequently won the day. You don't have to have read Machiavelli's The Prince to know that politics is about power. And Williams, who could never be accused of being ignorant of the uses of power, was not consistently good at practicing the good governance and the democratic principles he preached. The radiance of his intellect and philosophy was often obscured by the dark imperatives of political reality. Significantly, his style persists to this day, which is why I tell people very seriously that Williams is still in charge of Trinidad and Tobago. Let me be clear, I am speaking only of style, not of intellect or of substance. His reluctance to devolve meaningful authority, his insistence that virtually all matters should go to the cabinet, that is, to him, the consequent exaltation of the Prime Minister as primus inter non pares, first among non-equals. These days, I suppose we prima, because we have 2 ladies as Prime Ministers in the Caribbean. These characterize our government behavior to this day, and it is replicated throughout the region. Good governance means, above all, a constant nexus with the people at all levels. The early Williams excelled at this. It wasn't so much his speeches in what he called the University of Woodford Square and elsewhere in Trinidad and Tobago. Those were educational, yes, but they were lectures to the people. More to the point was his lengthy Meet the People tour in 1963-64, when he interacted directly with the people. The tour took nearly 1 year, but it was direct democracy at its finest. Subsequently, he visited government secondary schools, as well as agricultural and industrial projects, among others. This is not the time or place to examine what happened thereafter. Suffice it to say that the manifestation of the common touch increasingly lessened. The intellect remained intact, however, as did the commitment to regional integration and to economic and psychological independence, and the extraordinary grasp of his country's and the Caribbean's place in the world. Are all these concerns of Williams of relevance to today's Caribbean? Political independence has been achieved. But what has it meant in practice beyond a flag and an anthem, and too often self-important ambassadors and high commissioners? Have we achieved economic independence? The answer clearly is no. It might have been difficult to do, even impossible. But has a concerted and sustained regional effort been made in that direction, as Williams advocated? Depressingly, the answer must again be no. For instance, does anyone now recall his strenuous and eventually failed efforts to establish a regional aluminium industry based on the natural gas of Trinidad and Tobago and the bauxite and alumina of Guyana and Jamaica? Do we understand, as Williams did so well, the links between foreign and domestic policy? If we do, we are brilliantly concealing that knowledge. It is not that nothing has been done. The Caribbean was prominent in discussions on and within and on the structure and functioning of the African, Caribbean, Pacific, the ACP group in Brussels. I can speak from personal experience about our joint efforts in Ottawa and in Washington, both at the bilateral level and in the Organization of American States. But we have been stumbling badly, and our pathetic performance on the issue of the Economic Partnership Agreement, the EPA, which we have allowed Brussels to persuade us to accept, will come daily to haunt our economies. I say nothing about our lamentable record on Haiti or about our recent contortions on Ecuador and Julian Assange. At a conference in Jamaica last August, Norman Govan described the Jamaican situation as one of independence, that is, in-dependence. The same can be said about nearly all the countries of CARICOM. Govan spoke of a series of crises: financial, economic, social, political, environmental, and what he called civilizational, meaning that, as he put it, quote, "Our present model of civilization, based as it is on the unlimited and permanent accumulation of material wealth, is fundamentally unsustainable," unquote. Govan's lecture is one we would all do well to study closely. Norman might not wish to be lumped with Williams, but at least one proposal he made in August was remarkably reminiscent of what Williams urged on his Georgetown audience in 1963. That is, joint regional action in two sectors, agriculture and food security, and transport. There was no CARICOM in 1963, not even CARIFTA. But Williams was already urging us along regional lines and placing his argument in the context of international developments. How has CARICOM been performing in this area? I just mentioned the Economic Partnership Agreement conceived by the European Union. But within CARICOM itself, there is little cause for cheering. We all see how indispensable the organization is and how hard we will work to protect and preserve and promote it. But do we? I have looked at CARICOM heads of government decisions between 2007 and this year in two key areas: functional cooperation and the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, or the CSME. Functional cooperation is one of the pillars of CARICOM as set out in the Treaty of Chaguaramas. In July 2007, the heads of government issued a declaration on the subject. They mandated, quote, "a comprehensive review of regional institutions with a view effectively to rationalizing their functions, funding, and structure," unquote. When a politician uses the word comprehensive to you, run for cover. 5 years and more have passed. The heads have not uttered another word on the subject. As for the CSME, the heads agreed in 2007 that, quote, the single economy should be fully operational by 2015. It's a little more than 2 years from now. 5 years later, they, quote, assessed the status of the implementation of the CSME and recommitted to ensuring the achievement of its original objectives, unquote. And that 2012, was after last year's decisions to, quote, put a pause on specific elements of the CSME. How are you going to put a pause on elements and achieve full operation at the same time? No mention is now being made of 2015. You understand why Williams stopped attending CARICOM summits. And he died more than 31 years ago. At least, and here I join Rachel, the members of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, are trying to pull together. They have ratified the revised Treaty of Basse-Terre on Economic Union and inaugurated an OECS assembly. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, has been in the intellectual vanguard of the OECS integration process. He has been speaking, rightly, in my view, about the emergence of poles of integration, not only within CARICOM, but also involving CARICOM and non-CARICOM states. I think Williams, with his larger view of the Caribbean, might have approved in principle, though his approval would have been tempered by his fear of possible Venezuelan hegemony over the area. What about the discipline, production, and tolerance about which Williams spoke to a youth rally on August 30th, 1962? The discipline he meant was, quote, both individual and national. The individual cannot be allowed to seek his personal interests and gratify his personal ambition at the expense of our nation, unquote. Do we of the Caribbean understand what self-discipline is? Can we say today that the national or regional interest always, or even generally, transcends the personal or group interest? Except on special occasions, to what extent do we think of country or region at all? Do we take responsibility for our actions? Or do we make a virtue of prescribing solutions rather than attempt to put prescriptions into practice? By production, Williams was also speaking of productivity. Does every trade union leader and businessman understand that and practice it? Or every public servant? Do we pull our weight? Or do we, as Williams warned, fatten at the expense of others? On tolerance, Williams told the young people that they had to learn to live together in peace and to teach their parents, quote, to live together in harmony, the difference being not race or color of skin, but merit only. Differences of wealth and family status being rejected in favor of equality of opportunity, unquote. Do we, as a matter of course, place merit above group or sycophancy or followership, political or other? To what extent do we speak to rather than at one another? Is all this really harmony? Does it equate to tolerance, let alone acceptance? Have we achieved the equality of opportunity Williams envisaged? Further, have we achieved equity in our societies? Williams's youth rally speech is now largely remembered for his statement that the future of the nation was in the young person's school bags. It is generally forgotten that another principle he gave that day was honesty. It can fairly be argued that not everyone in Williams's own administrations in the following decades adhered to that principle. But what of today? Can we confidently say that we do not generally allow, even encourage supporters and friends and family to graze unhindered in the lush pastures of the state, and often do it ourselves? Another sub-theme linked closely to the school bag concept, in other words, education, was what he saw as the anti-intellectualism of the West Indian tradition. People's lives, he wrote in 1965, are bounded by narrow materialistic considerations to which a head of government cannot be limited. Williams was, of course, an exceptionally brilliant man who was impatient of those he considered less visionary. The tolerance he called for on August 30th, 1962, was not always evident in his personal and official relations. It's a good thing the poor man is not around to hear the intellectual level of Caribbean discourse today, if intellectual is the word. And can we truthfully say that we have achieved psychological independence, the capacity, and above all, the willingness to think and act for ourselves? The expatriate British officer is no longer with us, ladies and gentlemen, but would it be incorrect to say that the Caribbean still measures itself by the favor of foreigners, especially North American, and more especially white? Is Massa Day really done, as Williams thought, or has Massa merely changed face and nationality? Except at times of sporting euphoria, football teams from Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago in the World Cup finals, or a T20 win by the West Indies cricket team, or outstanding performances at the Olympics. Except at such times, do we see ourselves as regionalists? After the London Olympics, for instance, there were many calls for the establishment of a regional sports academy. It was as if such an academy had not already been launched in Paramaribo, a CARICOM capital, several months before the Olympics had even begun, on the basis of a decision taken by the CARICOM heads of government in July last year. We don't even know the themes of our own regional existence, but we do familiarly know the theme parks of Disney World and the price of iPads in the Dadeland Mall. As for regional justice, it is clearly much more satisfying to cling like limpets to the reluctant coattails of the British Privy Council than to dedicate ourselves wholly to a Caribbean court of justice. Massa Day, ladies and gentlemen, is not yet done. I have tried in these remarks to identify the main currents of Williams's thought and relate them to the contemporary Caribbean. Is what he said and did, even if not all to our liking, of any importance to us today? Can we learn from his philosophy, his vision and his successes, as well as from his missteps and his failures? 50 years after political independence, is Eric Williams still relevant? I think by now you know what my answer is. Thank you.
Ambassador Dumas, product of Tobago, I guess we have to go over there for some of that secret juice that they're serving in Tobago as well. Another round of applause for our speakers, please. Ambassador. Master days of in-dependence are not done. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's your turn to exhibit a little bit of independence yourselves. I'm going to invite Dr. Percy Hinson, Professor of the Department of Global and Sociocultural Studies, here, to come up and to facilitate some independent thought and questions for the rest of the evening.
Well, now with all due diligence being paid to the diplomatic, official, academic and administrative representatives, and particularly to Ms. Erica Connell Williams, I'd like to say just a few words before I open it up to the audience. What we have heard today is something that I've always been convinced of, and it is the profundity and prescience of Caribbean thought. Unfortunately for the region, we have been unable to implement these visions, and this inability is affecting us deeply. However, as Rachel said, the circles of the ripple of Caribbean thought has penetrated those areas that presented themselves to be better than us. The idea of regionalism has now taken hold in Europe, the European Union, preceded by a common market, which was implemented in the Caribbean, and in North America, an economic union of NAFTA. Today, we are at the cusp of a new age, which is even more profound and transformative than the age at which Caribbean independence was implemented, the age of national independence. We are at an age where the global south and countries in the global south are now becoming the centers of the global political economy. India, China, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Iran, Indonesia, and others. And the Caribbean has been prescient in recognizing that because we are products of all of those areas. And it has been represented in the leadership of the Caribbean. We all know the African descended leaders, but we've had Indian descended leaders, Basdeo Panday, Donald Ramotar, Cheddi Jagan, Kamala Persad Besseser, all of whom have been prime ministers of the region. We've had Arthur Chung and Solomon Ho Choi, who were in Guyana, Chung, president, and in Trinidad, the official head of state, the first Caribbean official head of state that succeeded the governorship of Britain. We've had Middle Eastern leader Edward Siaga, and of course, we have had entanglements with Indonesia through Suriname. Now, it's our task in the Caribbean, again, to show the world what its future would be. And I hope that we're not going to miss the boat this time. FIU and University of West Indies are very much engaged in this task. We are now engaged in efforts to entangle the two universities in collaborative cooperation to examine policy and research for the next era of the world, and to pool our resources to engage in scholarship and policy. Professor Brian Meeks has been our partner in this, and it is unfortunate that inclemency prevented him from coming. So that's what I have to say. The Caribbean region needs to understand its prescience in thinking through the future. And rather than having others use our thought to their benefits, hopefully this time we will get it right. Now, that's my thought as someone from Guyana, and I'd like to listen to yours. So, and before we do, I'd like to acknowledge the two examples of the brilliance of Caribbean thought that we saw on display tonight. And I'd like to have our acknowledgement and applause once more. Now it's up to you, and I am going to direct it. There's a mic there, and don't be shy. We want to hear your voice.
Okay.
And if you could just say who you are. Sorry.
My name is Colin Edwards. I'm the owner of the engineering firm of Edwards and Partners. Yes. My question is, what about the political will? I understand that whether you talk about Nkrumah, whether you talk about Nairi, whether you talk about Julius Lumumba in the Belgian Congo, or William and Manley, but there is a political will. As an engineer, I've learned that I was very much impressed by the World Bank report on what happened in the Seoul, in the Korean project. And our leaders today, whether you talk about our leaders today, do they have the political will to take us forward in the way NW did and in the way Eric Williams did? That's my first question.
If they do, I have not discerned it. That would be my answer. If you look at the communiques coming out of the CARICOM summits, the heads of government meetings, which you can easily do, I invite you all, go to caricom.org. They have a good website, and you can see all the things by year, up to this year. All the communiques, all the various declarations that have been issued on whatever it is, functional cooperation, I mentioned one, but you have declaration on Haiti and this, that, and the other. You can see all these things. And it's all very interesting if someone were doing a research project to compare the language of these various resolutions and communiques and declarations on specific subjects, as I did on 2 only, but you can look at a whole range of them. And unfortunately, you will find that quite often the language is the same from year to year. Nothing happens. So if there's political will to get together, if there's political will to do something seriously as a region in order to assist the region and to raise the level, the economic, the social, the political, the environmental, the cultural, whatever else level of the region, I have been wholly unable to discern it. I hear a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of talk. We are going to do this, we are going to do that. Happens all the time. A lot of rhetoric. But in terms of action, in terms of serious planning, no.
I'd like to follow up on that question to suggest, I mean, I, for one, why does it, I would argue that it doesn't rest in a political will. I think that the more likely possibility for what Percy is talking about might well rest in the arts and in cultural movements and in institution building, precisely of the nature that he's talking about between FIU and the University of the West Indies, between University of Miami and University of the West Indies, through artist exchange, quite frankly, and through independent thought, which in my mind's eye in our contemporary moment does not rest in the realm of politics. So I'd like some sort of consideration for whether or not we may not need a different model for federation and independence that is founded first in a kind of artistic and cultural exchange, and possibly have that be the model for a political federation subsequently.
Everything rests in the realm of politics. Arts and culture are not to be separated from politics. No politician interested in power is going to allow that to happen. There is going to be an attempt to control, and if they can't control, to undermine. The only thing that politicians are afraid of is losing power. Or if they're out of power, not getting back into power. Therefore, since their prime consideration is votes, and votes mean people, the way to influence politicians is to have civil society, not any specific aspect like arts or environment or whatever, to have, because arts, there's Carifesta, you know. Carifesta has been around since the 1970s. There's going to be another one in Paramaribo or in Suriname. We have it all the time. What has happened? The only way is to have civil society, and this is something that I've been in discussion with some people in Trinidad and Tobago in recent times, to have civil society bring pressure to bear. Now, that is very difficult. It is not impossible, but it is difficult. But it can happen. And if civil society is ordered enough and vocal enough, the politicians listen. I do a number of things in Tobago and Trinidad.
I don't really agree with Reggie, though I think that it's the logical answer. But something tells me that if the only things that are bringing the argument to the table are competitive things, if you only go to the question of federation through economics, through competing markets, if you only go through little fiefdoms, each government, of course you're not going to get cooperation on federation because everybody has their territory that they're protecting. I think your suggestion, Pat, is excellent, that somehow if enough of us culturally and spiritually have that will for federation to happen. Eventually, you know, the bombs get thrown out. Eventually, new people will stand for elections that represent the things we want. But if we are constantly looking at it in terms of trade areas and arguments over who is getting more, you know, all it does is set up a problem. I see the great problem of federation. I hate to say this, and please, any Jamaican in here, don't be angry with me. I see us as a problem. I see Jamaica as a problem. I think we are the ones that have to come to the table and see the, I don't know if you say wisdom. I don't know if it's the wisdom of it, the logic of it. And I think it has to be an emotional logic. As I said, it has to be coming to it like family. But I think we have given up too easily. I think just the fact that Brian Meeks was so anxious to tell me about this. There are people, there are other people I asked who are over the moon with excitement about the OACS, the new treaty. And in fact, it was very amusing because I had to rewrite my speech because when I asked Reggie about it, he said, Reggie said to me, Richard, they're making it out to be far more than it is. I mean, I thought this was something that we were well on our way, that we could say to Erica this evening, you know, tell your father we're coming, we're delivering the product. But I don't give up on it at all, but I do think that we have to come to it through more and more cultural, joint cultural things, and more of a historic understanding of why it is logical and necessary. And I think we just cannot allow the politicians to bully us into it, into not having it, which is what is happening now. I think if we went to Portia, I'm thinking very seriously that we should just, out of this meeting tonight, we should have a delegation that go to Portia. Because I'll tell you, I don't think Portia would, I think she could be persuaded. Do you?
I would like to direct my question to both our guests. And it takes off, well, directly feeding into what Pat talked in the broader question of tolerance, and specifically the moderator's reference to leaders of particularly the Indo-Caribbean population who are heads of government or heads of state. You know, to what extent have we probably, let me put it this way, some ideas on race relations over the 50 years. What do you think? Have we brought ourselves together, or are we, what's your reading on it?
If I take my own country, Trinidad and Tobago, the issue of race is something that I have been speaking and writing about for many years. I consider it one of the most important elements of the society, if it is in fact not the most important element in the society. We like to say in Trinidad and Tobago that all are we is one, and we live together, and you know, et cetera, et cetera. But these are just phrases. We may go to school, the same schools, we may go to the same cocktail parties, but when I ask people of African origin, how many friends of Indian origin do you have? Then the conversation tends to come to an end. We have to confront the issue of race in Trinidad and Tobago, in Guyana in particular, because those are the two societies in the Caribbean. Suriname, sorry, is the third, that are very racially mixed. And we have not been doing so. Now, it is not a question of having a confrontation. We are all citizens of the particular country, whatever it happens to be, whichever country it happens to be. What we do not do, and as I mentioned in my remarks, is speak to one another. We make assumptions about one another. We speak at one another. We adopt slogans and give these slogans life as though the slogans are in fact real, are in fact actual, and they are not. There should be things in the schools. I first remember making a speech about this in 1990. And I have spoken and written about it since. It is a source of great disappointment and distress to me. You cannot have a viable society in which people see themselves as second class, see each other, see the other person as the enemy, where we talk about them people when we are belonging to one racial group and we look at another racial group and you talk about them people. I'll be quite blunt. This is happening in Trinidad and Tobago today. Them people in the government, meaning people of Indian origin. And that is being said by a lot of people of African origin. It is not helpful to the society. It cannot be helpful to the society. We have to have a conversation on race, on religion, on whatever it is. It happens to be in Trinidad and Tobago, in Guyana, and so on. We have to have this in the schools. We have to have this in the curriculum. We have to understand our past. We don't understand our past, therefore we cannot understand the present. And if you don't understand the present, you cannot make dispositions for the future. And that has been our continuing problem in the Caribbean. Talk in the air. And no solid action, no analysis of the societies, which would help bring better society in the years to come.
What happened to the double race? The double race is an integral part of our society.
Yes?
Right? The double race. Right?
Well, I'm not denying that. I'm talking about everybody.
But also,
Yeah.
I hear what you say.
Mm-hmm.
And we're from the same place and that kind of thing. He was talking about something that I think was apropos to what we're talking about. I could ask him about the double race.
We'll come back.
Hello, my name is Locke from Jamaica, Western Jamaica. For Miss Manley, you said that you're just a writer, not into, anything else but being a writer. I'm a Jamaican by birth, proud to be a Jamaican. I'm also owner of a newspaper in South Florida. I was in Jamaica 2 weeks ago for the conference that Brian Meeks had. And everybody that I've seen from UWA still holding on to federation. Now, listen to you this afternoon as a Jamaican. I would say, as a Jamaican, that your grandfather was a traitor, not a founding father, now a hero. For me to find out from you for the first time that there was a flag for federation, and when he lost, and I heard your anger, your pain, you have not broken away from that pain, that we'll never join the federation. And like in Jamaica, I know Brian very well. All the bright intellectuals in Jamaica and the Caribbean still speaking about the federation. And Mr. Ambassador, hearing you tonight, we are not saying that federation was a British entity. Lord Hayes brought it to us. And Norman Manley and Dr. Eric Williams were founding fathers by default. They never started off on Jamaican independence or Trinidad independence. They had a broader goal for the region. Now, Caribbean Federation had to fail because Jamaica is away from the eastern River Islands. Water, not like East Africa, where you have the 3 eastern African states, Tanzania and the 2 others. Jamaicans have been taking this beating that we mash up federation. And Buster is like giving...
Could you come to the point, please?
I have to give him a chance to wrap up.
Yeah, but for you to talk about independence and that, Ms. Manley...
Yeah, we understand. We understand, sir.
That you said that you're sorry that we never got in this organization.
I am sorry we never joined Federation. I'm sorry it hurts you, but I'm sorry we didn't join the Federation. I don't think Norman Manley was a traitor. I think that Jamaica has a real for all the geographic reasons, Jamaica has, I think, a real problem about the idea of being part of the archipelago, the islands that are near us that we may have reacted more closely to, speak different languages, and they come from different empires, they have different histories. But you know, I don't think, when you say that it was English, yes, the English were just looking for the most expedient way to get rid of the litter of puppies. It's as simple as that. But I don't think you can say that because people who genuinely love their country, and believe me, sir, it is very easy to go ahead in life and make these judgments and have these angers. But there was a time when all of the things that you take for granted that you have were not ours to have or take for granted. And somebody had to move the furniture. And people like Manley and Williams and Buster, they all moved the furniture. That is why people regard them as heroes, because there was a time, and they were the ones that negotiated all the break from England, whether it was independence or it was federation. But I made a point of saying it was like a consolation prize. And the first 15 minutes of what I said was about the fact that one could not but be jubilant about leaving colonialism. And my grandfather felt that way too. And he wrote the new constitution for Jamaican independence. Anyway.
Yeah, we're going to have one more.
Well, good. We can end on a positive note. I'm the program director for the Digital Library of the Caribbean. And in 2004, we started an experiment here at FIU with the University of Florida and 5 partners in the Caribbean to start an integration, to start a project where we brought together the library and archival resources from across the region. And today, and Marlon Hill mentioned it in the beginning, we have 35 partners. We have close to 2 million pages of content. We have scholars and students in elementary schools in the Caribbean, in the United States, in England, all the way in India, people doing work on Herbert de Lisser in India, dissertation work, because multiple parties from multiple countries with different languages came together to work and have expanded and made their resources available online for education. What are some other, as you say, concrete steps that can be taken where different entities can work across the borders of the Caribbean? And what role can Miami play as its strategic geographic location?
I'm so boiling over the last question, I didn't hear your question.
Well, library exchange, I mean, that is certainly, and archives, certainly extremely important because we have to try to the extent possible to know our history, to know about one another, and so on, etc. There might be educational exchanges. between schools. That happens to an extent. No, not with Miami necessarily, but with 1, 2 other places in the United States. You could have sporting exchanges. In other words, things could be done at the people level, if you like. And the lady there mentioned the arts, cultural level. All of these things can be done. Just bear in mind that just having these exchanges is good, very good. We learn about one another, but doesn't necessarily translate into the upliftment of the particular society. That is something that has to be done by the people of that society. And that is why I mentioned the question of the role of civil society across the board. And civil society meaning not only people at a certain level, but at all levels. Civil society, bearing in mind, I want to stress this, that the politician is going to try to undermine because he wishes or she wishes to control. But it can be done. It can be done. And these exchanges can be done also without necessarily having to go through the government.
Yeah, there's great demand. So what we're going to do is to have 2 more last questions. We saw.
Oh, you going to hold it? Mr. Dimas, you can't hear me? All right. During the 50th anniversary celebrations in Trinidad, there seemed to have been some doubt or lack of wanting to include reference to Dr. Williams during the celebrations. And I got the impression that there was a clear intention to eliminate him from the events and memory of 1962. Would you like to comment on that?
And I'd like to suggest the other question, and there's a lady there who, and so we wouldn't have to go back and forth, and then, yeah.
Okay, my name is Fulvia. I just wanted to ask that Trinidad's a republic, and Jamaica is now declaring that it wants to become a republic. So what is the relevance of the British Commonwealth as an organization to the Caribbean-speaking country, English-speaking countries?
I would prefer not to answer the first question. So I'll start with you, ma'am. The fact that you're a republic doesn't mean that you can't be a member of the Commonwealth. In fact, most of the countries of the republic, with the exception of places like Britain, of course, or Canada, Australia, a number of the English-speaking Caribbean countries, Grenada, Barbados, etc., are republics. The fact that you're a republic simply means that you have your own head of state. You no longer have the Queen as the head of state. These others have the Queen. Trinidad and Tobago has its own president. Dominica is another one which is a republic and has its own president. And Jamaica is moving in that direction. The Prime Minister has already made it clear that Jamaica would be moving to Republican status to have its own head of state. But the fact that you are a republic does not mean that you are not a member or cannot be a member of the Commonwealth. You take the African countries. The relevance of the Commonwealth to the Caribbean. The relevance of... Sorry? Well, as I said, I mean... Federation of the Caribbean and the Commonwealth, of course, two completely different concepts. The Commonwealth helps the Caribbean in several ways, assists the Caribbean in several ways, like the United Nations does, in technical assistance, in health, in education, and a number of other areas. Help that would not be available otherwise. And for countries that need it, perhaps Trinidad and Tobago doesn't need it to the same extent that, say, St. Vincent might need it or Grenada might need it, such help is very crucial and very vital. If they were not members of the Commonwealth, they would not be able to get that assistance. They would have to get it elsewhere and perhaps pay for it, which they cannot do. As for federation, I was in the federal government. I was a public servant in the federal government. So I have some idea of this. But I do not, quite apart from things coming out of the university, which I have been hearing, I have not heard anyone in the region at the civil society level or in government talking about federation again. Not a soul. I'm hearing it out of the university. Some people say, yes, that when I was present at something in Tobago, a seminar some months ago, several months ago, where one of the young university lecturers talked about federation. I have no objection in principle to federation. As I said, was a member, a civil servant in the federal government when it existed. The question is, how do you go about doing it now? At that time, in 1958, when the federation was founded, we were all colonies. We were all British colonies. And it was easy for Britain, as Rachel has said, to put us together, because that was the British way of dealing with colonies, a number of colonies. It wasn't only the West Indies. It was also East Africa. East African, there was a Federation of East Africa. There was a Central African Federation involving Rhodesia, the North and South Rhodesia and so on, and Zambia, or what is now Zambia. There was a Malaysian Federation involving Malaya and Singapore. That was the British way. You get these chaps together, you know, and they're all the same, you know, I mean, same background. Put them together. And all the federations fell apart. The question is why? With the possible exception of the Nigerian Federation, and that is always under threat, that one. So, while it was easy then in the 50s, now you have a number of independent states. People have become accustomed to being prime minister and minister of X or Y and being ambassador of such and such. And it is not going to be easy to persuade such people to give up all of that and merge their identity into a federation. I don't say it's impossible. I don't say it's impossible. Nothing is impossible. But it is something that I have not been hearing about. I have not heard a single head of government in the Caribbean talk about a revival of federation. Not one. Economic integration, yes. Like you have a European Union, you have economic integration, and the OECS happily is moving towards that. We, in the wider region, the wider CARICOM, may one day move towards that with the Caribbean single market and economy. It might achieve that. But political integration, I have not been hearing about as coming from the politicians or even from the populations.
Okay.
The other gentleman,
Sorry.
The other gentleman asked about. No, there was another question about Eric Williams. About Eric Williams and the 50th anniversary of independence. This was reported. The opposition, the PNM opposition, argued strenuously and said strenuously that the government was trying to downplay the importance of Williams. for the 50th anniversary. The government just as strenuously denied that it was trying to do that. The suspicion remains that the government was not paying the attention to Williams as the first prime minister, the first premier in 56. Sorry, he was chief minister then, became premier a few years later. The government gave the impression, I have to say, that it was not particularly keen on raising the level of Williams. But that might simply be my understanding, which might be wrong. I don't know. I was not, I have to say, persuaded by the arguments of the government that it was not trying to do that. But I'm not sure that Williams was given, finally, the recognition in the 50th anniversary celebrations that he was entitled to.
Okay, we'll allow one. I mean, I know everybody wants to say something. There's a time limit. We'll allow one more question.
Jerry Nagy is the name. I just wanted to ask about the implementation of the CARICOM passport, what led to it, and to what extent that has furthered any semblance of integration.
Thank you. I have to tell you, I don't know too much about it. If I have to go to another Caribbean country, I use the Trinidad and Tobago passport. I have heard about the CARICOM passport. I've never seen one. I wouldn't know where to apply for one. And this is what I'm saying, you see, about the talk. We talk also about, we say there's freedom of movement. What freedom of movement? If I arrived in Barbados or Jamaica tomorrow without a passport and said, I'm a CARICOM citizen, here's my driver's permit to show that I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, I'll be put on the first plane out. What freedom of movement? Yes, they say that certain people in the artistic field, and I'm glad of that. I mean, the lady who was sitting there would be glad of it too. Producers, playwrights, etc., and also professional people and certain business people can move freely, but they still have to have their papers. And problems still arise at airports. There is a case now that a Jamaican lady has brought against the Barbados immigration for the way she was treated at Grantley Adams Airport some months ago. The case is going on now. So, and Guyanese complain all the time, as Dr. Hinson would know, not he, of course.
I complain too.
About how they are treated, both in Barbados and, I regret to say, in Trinidad and Tobago. Helpfully, Caribbean Airlines has just announced that it will be having a direct flight from Georgetown to North America without having to pass through Trinidad.
Okay, so I will call.
A round of applause for Dr. Hinson. Almost at the moderated Federation dust up there. But we have enough time for Federation Fellowship in a few minutes outside. I'm going to invite Dr. Judith Bernier to come up to make some closing comments and acknowledgements.
Good evening. The African and African Diaspora Studies gratefully acknowledges the following sponsors for their support and contribution to the 14th FIU Eric Williams Memorial Lecture. The gold sponsors are the University of the West Indies, the Caribbean Council Corp of Miami, Florida, Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, And from FIU, College of Arts and Sciences, School of International and Public Affairs, Ruth and Shepherd Board Distinguished Lecture Series, Latin American and Caribbean Center, the AADS Graduate Students Association, Caribbean Students Association, Council of Student Organizations, Students of Government Organization, Student Programming Council, the Multicultural Greek Council, and last but not least, the Black Student Union for this support, the generous support. And finally, the corporate and community sponsors, Adams Project Management Unlimited, Billmore with Advertising Specialty Incorporation, Diane Galloway's Herbal Garden Incorporation, Edwards and Partners, Emily Sage, Adrian and Guimard Sign, Linda Pierce Bonton, Joyce Roti Delight, Melvin Solomon, Miami-Dade College, Professor Leroy Lashley, Welch and Morris Association Limited, Zickerich Architects, Amara Corporation, and Neil Persisad. And at this time, I would like to introduce Danielle Phil-Amy from the Haitian American Historical Society, who would like to present a gift of appreciation to Dr. Reyer. Let's see.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers. I would like to introduce Mr. Daniel Fils-Aimé, founder and chairman of the Haitian American Historical Society and of the Haitian Historical Museum and Archives, located in the great city of North Miami. And myself, Alexandra Barbeau, the executive director of the Haitian American Historical Society and co-founder and executive director of the Haitian Historical Museum and Archives. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to you tonight. In May 2011, we inaugurated the Haitian Historical Museum and Archive in North Miami. The mission of the Haitian Historical Society is not only to showcase Haiti's history, contribution to the United States, art and culture, but also to expose it to the greater public in order to foster better understanding and collaboration among the inhabitants of this diverse city. I am proud to present this award at the occasion of the 14th annual Eric E. Williams Memorial Lecture and the 50th anniversary of the independence of both Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. This lecture is a long-standing tradition that contributes to enrich the culture of the diverse nationalities living in our great city. We are wishing continued success for the most anticipated intellectual event of the year for many years to come. I would like to call to the podium Mrs. Erica Williams Carlisle.
Good evening. Again, I'm Daniel Fils-Aimé, chairman of the Haitian American Historical Society, and we just like to present this plaque to you to hold that what you're doing is good, and we try to partner with you for whatever we're going to do.
Tu vas lire la plaque?
I'm going to read the plaque. The Board of Directors of the Haitian American Historical Society honors the 14th annual Eric E. Williams Memorial Lecture with our sincere appreciation for all the hard work, dedication, and commitment in keeping alive the memory of his achievement as an example for future generations to come. See Daniel Fils-Aimé, chairman of the board.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, outside in the breezeway, we're going to be having some after lecture Federation Fellowship and desserts in the breezeway, and also book signing as well with Ambassador Dumas and Ms. Rachel Manley. Please do not leave yet. There's a very important piece of business. In your program, there's an envelope. I know we don't have a single currency in the Caribbean, but you all have your own currencies that you can support the Eric Williams Memorial Lecture, and also to support what the Department of the African and African Diaspora Studies programs is doing. If you have cash, if you want to use a credit card, or if you have a check, or you'd like to make a pledge, Mr. Edwards, all the way from Tobago, please make sure that you leave something on your way out the doors. Thank you for being here this evening.